Hey, Lem. How you doing?
Doing well, Victor. Good morning, or I guess good afternoon
Good
out in Spain.
afternoon. Over here, exactly. So this is very going to be very intriguing for me because it's a subject I really know close to nothing, and that is, if I understood right, and you will correct me, it's modern technology in recruiting. All the buzzwords like machine learning, artificial intelligence, taking over the world, and you will eventually probably answer the question of why I'm getting so much spam on LinkedIn as well. Is that kind of a plan, give or take?
Yeah, I'm no self-proclaimed ML or AI expert, but there's certainly a modernization happening around the tool sets that recruiters use and the thinking that goes into candidate identification and engagement all the way through to onboarding actually. And it's really nice to see that my industry, my corner of the industry is catching up to some of these things. Thinking through automation and utilizing some of the powerful tools out there around ML and AI to build on top of to solve problems in our space.
So how does it work today? What are the main tools? Are we talking about big players like Linkerd and Google, or something nobody knows about except recruiters?
Yeah, I mean, I think certainly these tools are more built for sourcers and recruiters, but it goes down that stack, right? Like that whole recruiter process from the initial candidate identification all the way down through onboarding. And there's big companies like Google that have built some of this proprietary stuff internal, and some things that they have actually released out to the industry. Some of it open source, but some of them, of course, they want you to pay for a lot of it. A good example of that is around Google's Cloud Job API. I think it's a really interesting piece of piece of technology in that it really helps solve a problem for recruiters, right? And that problem is that there's really not a standard nomenclature around job titles or the relationships between skills or the way that people represent their skills on their resumes, on LinkedIn, on other places where they have a web presence. There's such a high degree of variance around those things. I'll give you an example. One of our challenges, before we ended up closing our awesome solutions engineer, Steven, um, it's like, what do people call themselves if they're in solutions engineering? Is it solutions architect? Is it sales engineer? Is it field CTO? There's just a huge body of different job titles, just that a recruiter, if they're trying to do that manually, you literally have to go into LinkedIn and really kind of write all those out. Like I can show you that on LinkedIn what that kind of
Sure.
looks like. If I think my screen is shared here with you.
Yes, it is.
Um, Perfect. So yeah, it's like you look at like something like solutions engineer, for example. Right? Okay, let's say solutions engineer in the United States. We'll leave it as a pretty simple search. 47,000 folks. Now, you have to imagine out of, the hundreds of millions of people that live in the United States, being a tech center in a lot of different, municipalities like San Francisco, Austin, New York, etc. There's probably a lot of people that are solutions engineers, but they're not maybe like super relevant to what we're trying to do. So you have to like at the same time, this is a manual process, right? So this is one of the frustrations and challenges as a recruiter. You have to think about, okay, well, what else do they call themselves, right? So they might be solutions engineers or sales engineer. Let's see how that changes the calculus. Wow, what a big jump, right? So solutions engineers and sales engineers went up, almost 200,000 people. So one of the challenges is like, how do I make sense of that? There's obviously like a wide variety of like types of solutions engineers and sales engineers inside of this job profile. So what Google did, and I'm going to move my screen over to this. What Google did is they said, okay, well, let's create an ontology, right? Let's look at all the different ways that people describe their jobs and their specific occupations. And let's start to segment that into blocks, into groups. Now, this is not rocket science, right? This has been done. This is like old kind of way of approaching this. In fact, there's a government website that has done this, and it's really kind of just old school, right? But all the information is there. But it's really useful if you can start to build on top of that, right? Now that you have created a categorization framework, now you can go in and start looking at the individual relationships between things, right? So this is like an example of an ontology inside of what might be like a translator, right? Maybe a Spanish translator. And there's things that you can infer between these relationships, right? If this person lists bilingual, but maybe doesn't list Spanish, right? But maybe has maybe a Spanish-oriented name, right? Miguel, or like me, Diaz last name. You can infer, hey, maybe the other language that they know is Spanish, right? So you start to create some contextual awareness around the relationships between all of these different components and how different people describe different things. So it's pretty amazing that they can build on top of that. And I think one of the dirty little secrets inside of the recruiting space, is particular to LinkedIn, is that they sat on this bucket of information for years now. And now that they're part of Microsoft, it's going to be hard to really kind of think about them innovating to the degree that they can utilize some of these like really smart relationship building things and provide an end user experience that can then utilize that in a way to help them think about, where do I go in my next job? Why is that next job going to be appropriate for me? What's the career trajectory of that? So there's kind of a new phase of technology being built on top of these like ontology and categorization frameworks that just unleash a lot of power for both the recruiters to go in and actually do some searching. But what I think you'll see over time is that actual like folks, job seekers, whether they're passive or active, are going to start having tools that are presented to them as the end user that can really start to help them understand with a lot more context, what is the logical next step for me? What are the companies that make the most sense for me to go in? By utilizing this underlying categorization framework, they can have some more of that more detailed context. So let me pause there, because I know I threw a lot of information out. I get a little excited talking about this, but I think one of the big challenges for recruiters is just kind of like making sense of it all. And that's for us like the starting point, which is why when you talk about spam, I think a lot of engineers get a little frustrated because like, I got reached out to by a recruiter. I'm a solutions engineer, but they're reaching out to me for a marketing role or a product marketing role. Like, what the heck happened? Oh, it's because a lot of those keywords are the same, right? And if they have to do that manually, then they miss out on that. But if you utilize a machine learning model, then it helps to really kind of like formalize those relationships and provides a lot more clarity for the recruiter.
I was muted, sorry. How much do you think recruiters are aware of those tools? Like, I constantly get offers to join a company because I'm extremely passionate and active in Java world, in which I haven't contributed anything. Kind of like, I haven't wrote a single line of Java code for like 10 years, right? So I guess that I'm guessing, right, that it still goes for some people kind of on a simple search. Is there a keyword Java in his profile anywhere, right?
Yeah, I think that's part of the challenge here and what this machine learning element is trying to solve for, right? And there's really like interesting sophistication around this that we're kind of, I would call it like in phase 2 right now, right? Phase 1 was, let's look at a resume, let's break it down, let's digitize it, and let's understand, like, let me search the keywords, right? And that's that's fairly straightforward, not a lot of magic there, right? But then V2 of this is like, okay, well, let's get a better understanding of the candidate. Like, let's get a better understanding of what they're talking about, what they're interested in, where they hang out beyond LinkedIn, right? And historically, we as recruiters would have to do that manually. We would have to go into, GitHub and check out, okay, what kind of pull requests does this person have? Where are they contributing? Is it recent or is it a one-off, right? And we'd have to manually try and like filter through all that thinking. And now there's tools that actually do that for us, right? They can actually go in and say, oh, you are talking about, Kubernetes. You're talking about control planes. You're talking about, crossplane, and that's like they can infer that, oh, that's an area of particular interest. Now, with natural language processing entering the conversation, they can start to understand, like, what is your sentiment around this technology? Are you actually answering like questions that are difficult, getting a lot of chatter underneath your maybe an answer that you had to a question about, Kubernetes, and really kind of starting to parse that out. And it's really hard for recruiters to do that because, we're not engineers. We can talk about 10% of the way down on that engineering stack, and then we start to get maybe lost in the details if we're not kind of up to speed on what's the difference between a declarative API and a normal API. Like, okay, well, who knows, right? If you're a recruiter, you have to really kind of be in that mix, but most recruiters aren't. So they need to utilize these tools to help us contextualize that, right? And really get an understanding of that. So I think that was like V2. And then like V3 is kind of putting that all together. And we're just starting to see this like kind of manifest itself both on the search side, but also through the interview process itself and on through to onboarding. And that is the contextualized signals beyond what's on your resume or beyond those skills. Call it more the soft skills, right? Or the environmental skills, things like, what's the company culture? That's a really hard problem to have a machine learning model solve for because it's so subjective, right? But you can extract in inference there. You can say, hey, like, I'm just going to throw out Google because I'm familiar with it, but Google is very data driven, right? They have specific development cycles inside of their environment. People tend to stick around there for a long time. There's a lot of internal mobility. These are all things that, like, how do you know that as a recruiter on LinkedIn? If that's your only tool, you don't really have that context unless you've worked at that company or you have an ally there that can really spend some time with you to explain all that. And it becomes very time consuming. And, just like engineers, we try and automate, as much as we can in our jobs as well. So the tools, thinking about NLP as an example, you can contextualize, if I'm a recruiter and I'm hiring people in the Kubernetes space, and I'm thinking about CI/CD and I'm thinking about all those keywords that are on there. I'm going to have all those keywords on my resume because I want to be attractive to other, companies that might want to recruit me in that space. But I'm going to show up on software engineering search results, right? And if you automate that without a human touch point, without some sort of filtering mechanism, there is some sort of intelligence, enter AI, then you could mistakenly reach out to recruiters instead of software engineers for your job, right? And then on, there's other elements like, using ML around, how do you favor these specific dimensions? So you're talking about, you might be involved in some discussions around Java, but it's not your core skill set, right? So the machine learning models that are out there even today, they have intelligence built in around that. Like, oh, this is something he's talking about, but let's compare that to his resume, or let's compare that to his GitLab profile or his GitHub profile, excuse me. And let's see, is this recent? Is he contributing code in Java, or is he just talking about it in more generalized ways? And there's models now that are actually intelligent enough to grok all of that and present us recruiters at the endpoint with, hey, here's a fit. Here's why it's a fit, culture wise, skills wise. Here's this person's actually pretty likely to move and here's why. That's another bit of intelligence. Like,
Okay.
you think about things like, hey, this person was at a startup. That startup, got funding 2 years ago. They're A round, but haven't gotten funding since. That's a signal, right? That's a signal, probably a little bit leaning towards maybe they're not doing so well and they're still bootstrapped, or they haven't executed well, so they haven't gotten their next round of funding. They look at things like, maybe the executives have left. There's been a high degree of turnover. That might be a signal. Hey, somebody might be loose in the saddle, right? And as an outsider, not inside of that company, you're probably not super aware of that in aggregate, across the whole industry. You might be aware of one or two pockets of where that's happening. But when you're trying to search for a broad, market and get really focused in on the types of roles you're hiring for, like, that information is like, it's platinum. It's beyond gold, right? It's platinum, because that's a high probability target for you. So there's tools like, and I'll show you a screenshot here of one. Let me pull this up to full screen. So this is like a tool Intel. This is a tool that was developed, a few years back. So it's a bit of old hat these days, but I really like what they're doing, right? Like and let me know if this is too small. I can try and make it bigger, but it's very similar in functionality to LinkedIn, in that you put in certain keywords, Boolean search, but then they do a lot of the heavy lifting for you on the background. Like if you're saying, a designer, then they can extrapolate that out to say, okay, UI designer, or front end designer, or consumer product designer. They can use all those different things, and that's automated, so it simplifies things. Right? They'll give you information about, like, hey, this person's in high demand. A lot of people are looking at this person, right? They're more likely to engage. Like, these are all super valuable signals that we can now extract, so that now, as an output of that, hopefully, you won't get spammed so much, because now we have more awareness around who you are as a person, right? And we can see all your different profiles across where you hang out on the web. And I think that's the true power of ML and AI here, for these types of products inside of recruiting.
Yeah, that's very positive, not only, I guess, for recruiters, but also for the rest of the people, because most of us probably, we do want to be found, because, new opportunities, what's or not, but on the other hand, we don't want to be spammed. So I guess it's a win-win for both types. I mean, both general population and recruiters. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. And then, even beyond that, right? It's not just that you don't want to be spammed. It's, you want it to be the right fit at the right time too. There's a timing component there, right?
Correct.
And we're not here yet, but this is, if I had to, put my money on a bet, this would be my bet. I think about the recruiting industry in some aspects kind of following suit with like what travel agents went through a couple decades ago, right? They were like, you had to go to a travel agent if you wanted to get like a really badass vacation planned, right? They were the best ones. They knew the best deals. They were connected. But then as technology started to come on, Travelocity and those types of companies, it kind of automated away a lot of their jobs. So they had to specialize, right? And they had to get more nuanced on what they offered. And I think that's kind of, we're seeing some of that, or we've seen a lot of that already in recruiting. But the next evolution is, thinking about, myself as my career, like what makes sense for me as a next step, and how do I think about that? How do I unlock the different companies and environments and cultures where I'm going to be successful? That's what I want to see, right? And we're almost there. There's these models are kind of like the scaffolding, right? Once they get trained and there's you add the NLP elements and all of that stuff. Now we have the scaffolding to build something cool like that. And now it's a career management, like endpoint for you. So you can think about, oh, I'm, at, call it Google, but I'm really startup minded, right? And I want to go to an early stage startup, but I want to be in an environment where I can succeed, right? So maybe, this piece of future software will tell me, oh, you should check out these 12 companies. Here's why you're going to succeed at this startup. It's, a Series B, technology stack, very similar, but they're doing some new things with Go or, Kubernetes extensions for control planes or whatever. And the culture is this, like, okay, well, that's the part that I'm interested in, right? The culture, like, what are their development cycles? Is this a, work 15 hours a day kind of thing? Like, what are the people like there? Do we have similar interests? Like down to that level where you can actually grok, like, am I going to get along with these people, right? And it looks at information like, well, where did these people come from? Did they come from, other environments that were data driven, other environments that had a similar tech stack, or that were using modernized technology and had room for new folks to come in and learn those things? Like, those are all the inferences that you can get with this kind of like underlying base, scaffolding of this ML technology. So I'd like to see that, because then at that point, unfortunately, maybe for folks in my profession at the earlier stage of their career, a lot of the transactional stuff around, I need to find a candidate, I need to engage that candidate, I need to provide them with context, and I think a lot of software engineers, especially, they want to talk to other software engineers. They don't want to talk to recruiters. So if they can get a body of information that says, that company actually fits what I'm thinking about, and I don't need to talk to a recruiter, like, that's going to be kind of like maybe a giant step forward for them in the right direction.
We have 2 questions and a dare.
Okay.
Do you want a question or a dare?
Oh man, a dare. I can't step back from a dare. Let's hear it.
A dare? Okay, here it is from Jared. Can we look at his profile and tell him why no recruiters ever hit him?
All right, let's do it. Let's look at
You
Jared.
asked for it, huh?
Jared, I'm going to put you on blast right now. All right, so I'm going to actually go into your public profile here, because LinkedIn Recruiter shows a bit of different information. So Jared is one of our awesome founding engineers here at Upbound, engineering manager, great mind, and an even better people manager. One of my favorites here for sure. So I'll kind of walk you through just, you're like, what is this side panel thing? This is a tool called Gem, and this is also a piece of automation that we use. This is around like candidate reach outs. Again, just like, call it DevOps people, right? And software engineers in general, you want to have tools at your ready that help minimize the administrative burden of your job or automate things in ways that they can. But it also gives us, quite a bit of information around, different profiles where this person might hang out. So in this case, let me look at Jared's profile. He dared me to see why people don't hit him up. I think was the question, right? So as you can see, Jared doesn't have a lot of context on his jobs. He just has simply a job title and a company, right? I think some of the things that recruiters would love to see is, well, what are you doing at these companies, right? If you want to be found, then this is a keyword thing, right? Like these models, these ML models, that's the starting point for them, is just ingesting keywords. And you just don't have a lot of that, right? You don't have a lot of the things like Kubernetes. You don't have a lot of the things, or even like variations of Kubernetes. I know like K8s or K8s, is another way to spell that. So that's all simply missing. So you're not gonna show up in a lot of those searches, because when we do a search, it's a Boolean search, right? We would look up like, software engineer, and then I would look up, and Kubernetes or K8s, right? And that would be like an example of a very, very broad search on this. And you'll see, like, we'll just go into, I'm just going to pick a random profile here. Let's see, Prasant. So Prasant doesn't have very much information either, but he has, this section here. There's information, down here about, what they've been up to. There's different skills, some of the groups that they might have been part of. So that's all inferred in these searches That was probably a bad example because it was a really, yeah. So here's like a better one, right? A lot more information here. And then, things like Docker, containerized, applications that play in kind of the same general space could be inferred for these searches. But LinkedIn honestly does a really, really bad job at that. In fact, that's why tools like Intello that I showed you earlier sit on basically as an add-on to LinkedIn, because they do a much better job in providing that context. And it just blows my mind, like literally blows my mind, why LinkedIn has not yet solved that problem, or at least released features for that. But then I have to back myself out of that and say, they want recruiters to become addicted to this technology and, have, daily active users and a lot of time on their platform, because that's how they sell, the value of, the company and measure their success. So it's a bit different. So yeah, Jared, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry. If I understood right, what you're trying to say is that if we see Jared filling in those additional fields, we will know that he's looking for a different company. Is that the summary of what you just said?
That's right. That's right.
Jared, we're looking at your profile. We'll know.
And you know what? If and when he does that, he gets bumped up in that the results page, because there's recent activity on his profile, and tools like Intello or Silential AI, they pick up on that stuff. There's chatter. This person took the time to update their profile, so now that you would notice you get a huge uptick. But don't do that, Jared. We want to keep you around. And what were the questions? You said there was a couple
questions.
Of questions.
Yeah, we have one from Dan. Then, how do you as a recruiter go about getting a broad understanding of a lot of different roles in an organization so that you can do first-line vetting? I guess you partly answered that, but what might be interesting is, how do you find out yourself? Okay, so if you're looking for solutions architect, that might include XYZ as well.
Yeah.
How do you figure it out?
Man, it's I'm fortunate in that I have a electrical engineering background and a computer science minor from Santa Clara University. So I intuitively get some of this stuff. I understand, what a pointer is in code, and, pull requests. Thank God, for the team at Upbound, even being so available to educate me. And these are hard. It's hard things to do for recruiters. But it's just having a lot of conversations, understanding and engaging with candidates to get a sense of what's important to them. What do they ask? I would not be able to tell you, down to a certain level, how kube control works, but I understand at a high level what Kubernetes does, and the orchestration element of that. And generally speaking, because I've been in the mix now, who the competitors are. But to articulate the nuances of us versus Acme competitor, and differentiations, that takes time, right? You're not going to be able to get that going right away. But I also look at probably 1,000 resumes a week, if not more. And you start to get a sense of pattern recognition, right? And you start to understand how people talk about their jobs. For example, I think one of the frustrations inside of recruiting is this concept of a full stack engineer, right? It's are they really a back-end engineer, a front-end engineer? Front engineers want to consider themselves full stack engineers, so they might call themselves full stack engineers. But then when you get through their actual profile, you start to see that they're really talking about more front-end elements, right? And you start to pattern match that. Oh, okay, this person's doing HTML5. This person's all about cascading style sheets and building single-page web apps. And okay, there's a pattern there. This person's probably not touching the back end too much, unless they start to add some of those elements and those keywords. Or you even look down in where people will talk about recommendations, and this is a gold mine sometimes, because people will talk about what this person actually did. They contributed to the open source community, or they were a platform engineer and helped us automate XYZ, and like that's really a kind of a gold mine as well. But it just takes time. I think like with any kind of new concept, you have to immerse yourself in it. You have to, I look at a lot of YouTube videos. It's such a great resource to go in, and I'm a visual learner too, so I have to like see the charts and graphs and the relationships in a visually represented, and that certainly helps me grok what the technology is doing underneath the hood.
Okay, we have another one from Dan. How do you prefer for a candidate to respond when they're not interested?
Yeah, simply the nicest response is, just, hey, not the right timing for me. Just give me a context. Like I reach out to, probably hundreds of candidates a week. And the ones that I think are most useful and what can get me out of your inbox, is just say, hey, I'm not interested in that part of the tech stack. Here's what I am interested in, or no thanks, timing's not right. I'm sticking around for a couple of years. That's fine. Then we can pull away from that, and we won't need to engage with you. I know it's very easy just to click the ignore button, or is there an ignore button? I don't know. Maybe there is. But just you're getting 10, 15 of these a week, maybe as somebody in our space, especially. I know our guys are getting pinged a lot. It's time consuming to have to respond. Honestly, we don't take it personally. I think that's part of our role. It's a frustrating part of our role to some extent, but an understandable part of our role, right? We know if you're going to spend 30 minutes, 45 minutes a week responding to recruiters that aren't going to end up yielding any meaningful results for you, why do that? But if it is a company that you are interested in, give us the context. Like, tell us, hey, you guys are too early, or maybe you're too late, and I'm looking for an opportunity to come in and be a leader or grow with the company. So I'm really targeting Series A companies. Like, give us that context, because maybe we can help scratch that itch in a different way. We can give you some context around, hey, we're building out a new function within our team. Maybe it's an innovation center, and it's functioning with like a startup within the company, for those bigger companies. So just giving just a fraction of useful information could actually yield a lot of great results. In addition, we're all well connected in the recruiting space. Like, there is just tons of cross collaboration, candidate sharing, things of that nature. So if we're not a fit, but you have context of where you might be a fit, then maybe I can point you to a colleague that is in a startup in an adjacent space that's more interesting. Of course, with your approval. I wouldn't do that without your approval. But usually, I'm pretty aware of other companies where my colleagues are recruiting and what they're looking for. So could be ultimately very useful for you to provide that just one or two lines of context.
Is the system intelligent enough to kind of like also take that into account? Kind of, hey, this Jared, he actually haven't responded to last 50 offers. Don't bother with him, type of stuff. Does that enter into equation somehow? How responsive we are?
Yes, it does. There's there's different tools like Beamery, HireTool. These are like smart sourcing platforms that integrate some of the same concepts that like marketing and marketing ops do. It's like, how do I segment out these different cohorts of people, right? And then within that cohort, I'm going to set up a campaign, or a lot of times they call them a sequence, right? And that sequence is going to be personalized, right? But it just extracts certain bits of information from your profile so that it feels like, hey, I'm not talking to a robot, or I'm not getting like spammed, me and 10,000 other software engineers. But then it'll attempt, first attempt, second attempt, maybe third attempt, and maybe the process is that another engineer or a manager or even an executive on the team, if you're a high profile candidate, might, be tapped on the shoulder to inject themselves in that process. But if there's no response, then that's recorded, right? And then you go into the black hole of the applicant tracking system. And now what we're seeing is candidate rediscovery, right? So there'll be some intelligence around a platform that can say, let me unleash you on my existing applicant tracking system. I want you to look at all candidates that we haven't talked to in the last 2 years. I want you to go in and I want you to update their profiles. So, pull in their new LinkedIn, update the applicant tracking system on their GitHub activity, all that other element all those other elements I was talking about. And now automatically compare them to our open jobs, our today's open jobs. And then, it'll match them automatically, and it'll tell you like, hey, you reached out to this person 2 years ago. They weren't interested or they didn't respond, but they're a fit for this role now. Maybe it's time to reach out to them again. And that whole process can be automated. And you set that up once and you effectively forget it, right? But then you run the risk as a recruiter of missing some context. So I think this is why I was saying, in drawing that comparison to travel agents, like you still need that human touch, because the ML models and the AI attached to this aren't quite sophisticated enough to fully understand, like, oh, that person switched from, being an SRE to, being a front-end engineer. I don't know if that ever happens, but, maybe there's been a shift in between and that person is no longer relevant. And maybe you're looking for a senior engineer on the front end. So you wouldn't want that person maybe showing up if they're just getting into front-end engineering. Or maybe you might deprioritize them a little bit. So all those different elements are really hard to do manually, right? There's just too many inputs to work around. So these tools help like really kind of, put fencing around that and automate a lot of that.
And why do you like doing what you're doing? Again, Dan is very active today.
Yeah, and by the way, Dan is. I'm sure a lot of you on this stream probably know Dan. He's very well liked and huge impact player inside of our space. One of my favorites here at Upbound. Also, really tuned into our culture, and I just want to give him props for that. A leader on that front. So the question is, what made me jump into recruiting? Did I get that right?
Yeah. What excites you about it? If anything.
I'll give you kind of a 30-second history of myself. So after I graduated, I worked at Cisco. While I was graduating, I worked at Cisco as an intern, and I was testing their big Cat 5K servers and their IP phones at the time. And there was 2 rooms in my world at Cisco. Even Cisco campus is huge, but I was relegated to 2 different rooms. I had a room that was about maybe like 9 feet by 6 feet, just barely enough for 2 people to sit in. And it had a little hole about this big where I can just barely see through my eyes to the testing room. And that's where the equipment was. And it was, electromagnetically contained room. And I had a senior engineer next to me, and I realized after 5 or 6 months of my internship that this guy he just seemed grumpy all the time. And I was like, what's going on here, man? Like I was trying to get him out of his shell. And I mean, the conversations that we had were mostly around, hey, do you want some coffee? I'm going to go grab a coffee. And I started to think I don't know if I want to be purely in the electrical engineering space, and that was my first real kind of deep dive into it. So I was like, well, what else can I do to utilize my undergrad, engineering skills, if you will, but in a more people-centric way. So it was also a very weird time. 2003, the industry was crap, and I was interviewing against very senior engineers for mid to junior level roles as a new grad. So I actually dipped into recruiting as a stopgap, quite candidly. It was not my intention to stick around there, but I actually loved it, and being able to talk technology and get people jazzed about companies and get them involved in career growth. And I moved in and out of different startups, and I landed at Google Ventures one of our investors here at Upbound. And it was as a talent partner there, and I got to see, 400 plus different companies. I got to sit in on pitches. I got to engage with entrepreneurs and engineers, and I was at the intersection of innovation and money, really, to put it bluntly. And just you feel the excitement, you feel the enthusiasm for people solving problems that are mission driven, from Flatiron Health and trying to solve cancer, to things that are way behind the scenes that don't have a lot of bells and whistles, but solve a meaningful problem around manufacturing or the way goods move about the world. So I don't know, I've always had an affinity towards where that intersection is between people and technology, and that's what has kept me in this role.
We're getting close to the end. Any parting words, Lem? Anything you want to say before I kick you out?
Let's see. I'm going to just do a quick look at a couple of the notes that I jotted down. I guess I'll leave you with maybe a counterpoint, just to be a little salacious and play devil's advocate.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of chatter around, where does this ML stuff and AI and automation, where does it become troublesome, right? And that's a problem in our industry, especially around things like diversity, right? Like there's technologies out there that are using facial recognition to determine if somebody is dark-skinned or not, right? And maybe bubble that up in the results. Like, at what point does that become unethical or weird, right? Like there's biases that enter into these technologies that serve to amplify our biases as recruiters, right? Even if they're unconscious bias. If I'm looking and I'm drawn to people that have, certain pedigree, right? They come from computer science schools, or even, maybe the elite class of computer science schools. And those are the folks that I'm tending to engage with, or ex-FANG companies, Facebook, Apple, Amazon, Netflix, and Google. And I put that into my search, and then the machine learning model starts to say, this person's only really interested in these types of people. Well, that shrinks down the pool, and it really doesn't make it fair for everybody else that can do that job extremely well. So how do you attack that bias, right? So those are some of the challenges, I think, inside of this. And even like word association, like there's a lot of bias around word association. If I say doctor, right, like people generally, there's studies on this, people generally associate that with a male, right? That's a masculine term for some reason, versus nurse tend to be thought as a feminine, even though there's plenty of male nurses out there. So trying to fight those biases, I think, is a burgeoning challenge inside of ML and all these tools that are being put forward. There's a lot of weird ones too. Like there's one out there that it's like a one-way interview where you ask a set of questions, and then they get presented to a candidate on video and effectively records their answer. And as part of that, they're looking at, your tone, you're looking at your body language, your facial features, to infer, is this person introverted or extroverted? Are they going to be combative? Are they very forthright and candid? And like, it has to extract that information. Like, that's a slippery slope there, right? There's a lot of ways that can go sideways. So that's something to think about, that the industry is thinking about, and I don't think quite has a good set of solutions around yet, but just food for thought as a parting gift to everyone.
So it's not really technology, if I understood right, what you said is not really coming up with new biases, but it is amplifying our ability to apply biases in a way, right?
Well, it's amplifying
you could go
our
through
unconscious bias.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you could go through CVs with the photo at the top left corner and discard people with color manually, but this kind of gives you a tool to do it maybe without even noticing that that's what you're doing, right?
Yeah, exactly. And to be fair, there are tools out there that are in fact trying to solve for this. So they will remove the photo, or they'll remove any pronouns that give you an indication of whether someone's male or female. They might remove the job title itself. And so you just look at the content of the resume. In fact, there's one of my colleagues, Lindsay Grenewalt, over at Cockroach Labs. She pioneered an experiment over there, I think in her early years there, where they didn't even use a resume. They didn't use a resume as part of their interview process. They tested people on the merits of their skills, right? And I thought that was an interesting approach. Creates a lot more challenges that you have to navigate around, but I think it's a much more fair way to assess somebody based on their skills and not on your assumptions of their skills or your biases that may be present.
Oh, I would add to that, and based on how much they're lying in their CVs.
Yeah, or that.
Okay, thank you very much, Len. This was amazing. I had no insight into how all those things work. I still somehow imagined, you guys, don't take this the wrong way, kind of like,
no,
send me the
I'm
CV,
thick-skinned, don't worry.
print the CV, kind of like, and then go, the stack of papers and everything.
Yeah.
No.
I'll tell you what, I've had managers at Google do that. They say, hey, print out all these resumes, and they just got a red pen and started marking them up as I'm sitting there with them. And I'm like, what are we doing? This is Google. We should have a better solution for this. Like, yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much, Len. And
all right. Thank you very much.
See you next week.
All right. Have a
Cheers.
good day. Bye.